Hey guys, we're on the dollar index on the monthly time frame. As you can see, we have a monthly fair value gap that possibly might get filled. Let's go into the weekly. As you can see, we had a rally on up with no break of structure, but we swept weekly liquidity. So therefore, I think price is going to retrace into this weekly fair value gap and then possibly go until the monthly fair value gap. Let's go into the daily. As you can see here, we swept weekly liquidity, and on my last YouTube video I said that price was going to do this, which it did, and I'll pull up a screenshot. I would be bearish on the dollar until this fair value gap gets hit, and then I would return bullish again. Let's go into the NASDAQ. We are on the monthly time frame. As you can see, there's a monthly fair value gap that is most likely going to get filled because we swept all this liquidity. Let's go into the weekly. On my last video, I also pointed this out, that there is a weekly break of structure and we swept weekly and weekly liquidity and might retrace into that monthly fair value gap. There's also a weekly fair value gap that price could end up tapping because we swept weekly liquidity. Let's go into the daily. As you can see, there's a daily fair value gap and we have swept all this liquidity. So let's go into the 4 hour. I would just wait until that fair value gap gets filled. So I would be bullish until this fair value gap gets filled, and then I would still be bearish, just like the dollar but reverse. Let's go into gold. We are on the monthly time frame. We might have a monthly break of structure, but we still have 12 days of this month. We are on the weekly time frame. We have broke weekly structure to the downside, and there's a weekly gap. As you can see, we have a weekly break of structure. Therefore, I would still be bearish on gold. Price most likely will retrace into this weekly gap, or we might take out weekly liquidity, which is down here. Let's go into the daily. As you can see, I pointed this out on my last YouTube video that the daily broke structure and we swept this liquidity, and we swept this liquidity over here. The weekly time frame just broke structure to the downside, so it might fill this weekly gap too and then retrace on up. I would still be bearish on gold. Let's go into the 4 hour. We might break structure to the downside, so I would just wait for price to develop on that. Let's go into the hour time frame. As you can see, we had an hour fair value gap get filled. Price might just bounce. We sweep all this liquidity and then move on to the downside. I would still be bearish on gold. But if it retraces on up, we might just sweep liquidity and then go down. Let's go to the S&P 500. As you can see, we had a weekly break structure, so that means we're bearish. There's weekly liquidity here, weekly liquidity, and then a weekly gap that might get filled. Let's go into the daily. So there's a daily break of structure and we swept all this liquidity, but in doing so, we left the daily fair value gap. I would be bullish until this daily fair value gap gets filled, and then we might head on down to the downside because weekly broke structure and there's weekly liquidity here. I would just wait until price touches that fair value gap and then be bearish from there on out. Let's go into the 4 hour. As you can see, there's a 4 hour fair value gap too. That just means prices still has a chance of retracing until those fair value gaps. So I would be bullish until this fair value gap gets filled, and then we're just gonna head on down. As you can see, I'm bearish on the dollar because we have a weekly fair value gap and we swept weekly liquidity. We would just retrace into this fair value gap and then bounce back. Monthly fair value gap, which is up here. The NASDAQ, we are still bearish on this, but there's a daily fair value gap. We might just retrace into this daily fair value gap and then proceed to head on down. Gold, there's really no fair value gap or anything, but there's a gap here, but it's already been filled twice. But we broke structure on the weekly, so therefore I am bearish, and we're still gonna head to the downside. S&P 500, same thing. Retrace until this daily fair value gap and then go on down. Have a good day and good trading.